Here's the part that nobody posts on Instagram. The way laughter can slice through you like a blade and leave you smiling anyway, too stunned to bleed. The night it happened, I stood under a ring of white lights that warmed everyone but me, in a dress I'd stitched from 2 thrift store mistakes and a handful of hope. She took one look at me, at my seams, my shoes, my face, and laughed like I'd shown up to a gala with a grocery bag over my head. I pretended not to notice. I pretended not to hear. But when the cameras flashed, the sound stuck to me like static. That was the last night I apologized for what I could afford, the first night I understood the kind of woman I would have to become. People say revenge is loud. Mine started as a whisper, remember this. My name is Ava Lane. I'm 25 years old, and for most of that year I felt like a ghost haunting the backstage of a life I couldn't afford. I'd moved to the city because I thought fashion would love me back the way I loved it, how I worshipped in fabric stores and knelt in front of bargain bins like pews. I had a studio apartment with a window that stared right into a brick wall, and when it rained the bricks ran like old lipstick. My mother called every Sunday to ask if I was eating vegetables. I always said yes. What I ate most were deadlines and the last crusts of my pride. The dress I wore that night was supposed to be my olive branch to the world I wanted to join. I'd found a boxy navy blazer for $4 and a satin slip in cream that was 2 sizes too big. I cut the lapels into a deep V and quilted the shoulder pads with thread I stole from a previous job. Stole is dramatic. I was owed 2 spools and took 3. I turned the slip into a column, left the hem raw on purpose, like a quiet rebellion. On my bed, the outfit looked sincere. On my body, it felt like a promise I wasn't sure I could keep. The invitation said it was a small launch for a new label called Lullaby, soft silhouettes, quiet luxury, the kind of brand that looked like it had never once taken the bus. I got the invite because I was interning 3 days a week at their social media agency, which is a fancy way of saying I collected garment bags, fetched iced lattes that melted into cloyed sweetness before they arrived, and pretended that being invisible was the same thing as being indispensable. The event was at a converted greenhouse with glass walls and a ceiling full of dangling ferns. Even the ice cubes looked expensive, like they had dress codes. When I stepped inside, cool air kissed my ankles, and someone pinned a white card to my blazer with my name and agency typed beneath it like a warning label. I told myself I belonged. I told myself belonging was just a muscle I'd forgotten to stretch. That pep talk lasted exactly 7 seconds, until Sloane Whitaker, who was the brand's face, at least for the pre-launch campaign, glided into view, all hair and earrings and the kind of confidence that makes other people rearrange their posture. I'd seen her in 17 mood boards. She'd once posted a photograph of a croissant that got 80,000 likes. I was near the drinks table, ignoring the tiny desserts that looked like jewelry, when she caught me staring a fraction too long at her shoes, black slingbacks with a bow like a secret. Cute, Sloane said, eyes traveling down my blazer dress to the raw hem I thought was artsy. Did you make that? Her tone made the question sound like an accusation. I smiled, because years of being the broke girl had taught me that smiles are armor. I did, I said. 2 thrift pieces. I wanted something. Her laugh arrived before I finished the sentence. It wasn't even loud. It was the kind of laugh you make when you taste something off and you know you're being watched. That's, wow. Brave, she said. So deconstructed. Very, art school final. A couple of people branded with the same kind of gloss turned to look, lips curving like they'd smelled smoke. My chest burned. Thanks, I said, throat tight. I like it. Sure, she said, sipping from a glass with a sprig of rosemary that smacked her upper lip. It's giving, experimental. Not so much lullaby, but, you know. Dream big. The words hit bone. I felt the place where my seams pulled just a hair too tight. I wanted to explain the hours with a needle between my fingers, the small blood moon I'd pressed into the satin when I pricked myself on the hem. I wanted to say that I couldn't afford lullaby unless I sold a kidney, that I'd built my look with patience and a prayer, and that maybe art school wasn't an insult. But I swallowed all of it because I'd learned that explanations taste a lot like begging when they leave your mouth. Instead I said, congratulations on the campaign. The mood film was beautiful. My voice was as steady as the table under the desserts. I could see my reflection in a dome of glass protecting tiny lemon tarts. She blinked, as if she'd forgotten I might have eyes to a brain. Thanks, she said, distracted now by a flash from a photographer. You work with the agency, right? The social girl? I'm the intern, I said. Right. You're the one always carrying the garment bags, she said, then drifted away on a cloud of perfume that smelled like expensive quiet. I stood there feeling like a crease someone had forgotten to iron. A handful of moments later, two girls sidled close enough to pretend they weren't whispering about me. Who invited Etsy? One of them said, to her friend's private delight. I pretended I needed the bathroom and took the long route through the greenhouse's back hallway, where the lights were kinder and the ferns didn't care who I was. In the mirror, I didn't look brave or experimental. I looked like a girl who had wanted something too much and showed it. I dabbed at the corner of my eyes, furious, not at Sloane or the girls, but at my own hunger. Wanting had always been my sharpest danger. What makes you say yes to too much? What makes you believe in doors that only open for certain last names? While I hid, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Jonah, the boyfriend I had loved since we were 19 and reckless enough to believe that love is a discount on the rent of the world. How's the fancy thing, he wrote. Send pics. Jonah worked nights at a bar with too many mirrors. He didn't care about clothes, but he cared about the way my shoulders relaxed when I talked about them. I snapped a photo from the bathroom that cropped out the parts of me I didn't want to see. Nervous laughter level, medium, I typed. He sent back a selfie with a beer tap, a smile I could smell across town. You're stunning. Don't let them make you small, he wrote, and for a second I believed him, because he had never once laughed at my clothes. Even when I wore a curtain as a cape to a Halloween party and called it couture. Even when I cried because a casting director told me I had a friendly face, not a fashion face, and he countered by saying, friendly is what people remember. I pocketed the phone, squared my shoulders, and rehearsed lines I'd use if the girls came for another round. But when I returned to the room, the air had shifted. Music swelled. The founder of Lullaby, a woman named Catherine who looked like she thought in spreadsheets and silk, stood on a platform near the greenery arch and tapped her glass. She thanked investors, mused about softness, said the future was quiet and responsible and about pieces you wore for decades instead of seasons. A dozen models appeared in a procession, moving like a single thought, all in shades of pale oat and fog. It was beautiful. It was everything I couldn't buy. I hung back, invisible, which is a safe and boring way to survive. That's when the agency director, Eliza, pulled me by the wrist toward the platform. Ava, she hissed. We're short a body. Danny called out. We just need someone to stand at the step and repeat and pass out the lookbook and smile. You're presentable. The word presentable landed like a crumb on a starving tongue. Not a meal, but better than air. I can do presentable, I said. Great. And if anyone asks, the drinks are from the left bar and the founder's speech is in 10. Don't interrupt anyone important. Meaning, everyone, Eliza said, then pushed me into a stream of people with teeth like commercials. At the step and repeat, a photographer I recognized from Instagram, he shot everything with a lens that made reality look like a memory, lifted his camera. You, he said to me. Stand here for a light test. I blinked and moved to the velvet rope, the smell of ferns and high-end laundry detergent thick in the air. I thought he would click once, wave me away, call the actual important faces. Instead, he cocked his head. Interesting silhouette, he said, looking at my blazer dress as if it were a word he was trying to pronounce. It's 2 vintage pieces, I said, and braced for the familiar sting. Nice, he said, like he meant it. Hold still. The flash popped. People turned. For a heartbeat, the room paid a kind of attention that had nothing to do with mockery. I didn't know what to do with it. I did what I always do when I'm scared. I held very still, like a rabbit that has read a book about being a deer. Okay, he said, distracted already by the next person lined up, who turned out to be Sloane. She slid in, all angles and trust fund cheekbones, and the photographer's nice turned into breathtaking. I took 2 steps back, then 3. I became the table again, the rope stand, the air. But I wasn't invisible to everyone. That's not a boast, it was a hazard. Toward the end of the night, when the speeches were done and the room had softened into afterglow, I felt movement next to me. Catherine, the founder, stood with a glass of something gold and a gaze that could strip wallpaper. She was shorter than I'd imagined, hair blunt at the jaw, a scar slicing her left eyebrow like a punctuation mark. "You're with the agency?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "Ava." "The intern." She studied my dress, not with disdain, not with delight. Just study, which is rarer than both. "You made this," she said, not a question. "I did," I said. "2 thrift finds." Because you wanted to be here and you knew no one would look twice if you came as yourself," she said, and something in me flinched, not at the accuracy, but at the kindness inside it. "It's good," she added. "It's imperfect, and it's good." "Thank you," I said, and the thank you lodged in my throat like warm bread. She nodded once, the way someone nods at a spreadsheet that adds up. We say lullaby is about softness, but softness only matters if it has a spine. People think quiet means weak. She sipped and peered at the room, where laughter rang like bells on a rich woman's bracelet. "It doesn't." Before I could say anything else, a man in a navy suit with a face like a press release swooped to claim her attention, and she was gone. I stood there holding the echo of her words like a candle cupped in both hands. Then Sloane reappeared, haloed by someone's phone flashlight, and brushed past me hard enough that her bow slingback grazed my toe. "Watch it," she said, without turning. The night ended with leftover flowers being divvied up like spoils. I grabbed a small cluster of ranunculus because I wanted proof that I'd been somewhere beautiful. On the subway home, everyone looked tired in the way that felt like currency here, and the flowers drooped in the heat. A woman in scrubs glanced at them and then at me and said, "Pretty," and I could have cried from the gentleness of it. In my apartment, I hung the dress on a nail I'd hammered into the wall after I learned the landlord wouldn't fix anything for people who paid in pennies. The dress looked like it was waiting for a kinder girl to wear it. I set the ranunculus in a chipped mason jar and scrolled through the event hashtag, punishing myself with the glamour of other people. There was Sloane, laughing of course, with her head tilted back. There was the wall of ferns. There was the bar. And there, in a cluster of light test shots, barely tagged, barely seen, was my face, chin lifted, seams visible, raw hem like a dare. I almost didn't show Jonah. He'd think I was beautiful if I wore a paper bag and called it minimalist. But a strange stubbornness took hold of me. I texted him the photo and typed, "Do I look like a joke?" He called immediately. "You look like the main event," he said, and then he told me he'd saved tips for 2 months to take me out somewhere with cloth napkins, because he knew I liked how cloth napkins felt like possibility. We set a date for Friday. I went to sleep believing I could turn humiliation into hunger and hunger into fuel. The next morning, my phone exploded. Not literally, though I did drop it in my cereal when the first buzz shook the table. At first, I thought my mother had discovered gifts. Then I realized I'd been tagged by the photographer. He'd posted a carousel of light tests that shouldn't be this good, and the first image was me. The caption said something about the magic of accidents. Comments bloomed like a rash. Some were kind, in that backhanded way, love the DIY vibe. Others were knives with smiles, Halloween came early. But buried among them was a comment from Lullaby's official account, a single star emoji. I didn't know it yet, but that star was the first breadcrumb on a path I'd take with blistered feet. Before I followed it, though, there was something I had to see, a truth I needed to acknowledge without speaking, the video Sloane posted later that afternoon. A behind-the-scenes shot with her in soft light, laughing as someone off-camera said, "Did you see that intern's dress?" She did a little impression of my hem with her fingers, and then she said, "Bless her heart." People loved it. People always love cruelty when it's dressed like charm. I set my phone face down. The jar with the ranunculus had already clouded with dull water. I poured it out, refilled it, and watched air bubbles chase each other up the stems. In the quiet, a resolve took shape inside me, small and sharp and patient. I wasn't sure yet if it would grow into revenge or something gentler, but I knew this. I would not be the punchline in the story I was writing. If laughter could be a blade, then maybe I could learn to turn it, tilting it until it became a mirror. That evening, as the last of the light tilted down the brick wall outside my window, Eliza texted, "Catherine asked for your email." No idea why. Be ready. I stared at the message until it blurred. Be ready for what? I didn't know. But I pinned the dress back on the nail like a flag, and I said the quiet part out loud to my empty room. Raw hem catching the light like a grin. Remember this. When someone tells you to be ready, your mind fills in the blanks with whatever shape your fear prefers. Mine gave me 3 options. Catherine wanted to scold me for taking up space where I wasn't meant to be. She'd seen the light test photo and decided I'd embarrass the brand. She'd offer me a pity roll, the kind that starts with "it's unpaid but great exposure." I checked my email 10 times before midnight. Nothing. By morning, the nerves had curdled into something worse, hope. I hated hope. It's a debt you pay twice if it goes unpaid. By noon the next day, the message arrived. Subject: quick meeting, 4 p.m. today. From Catherine, founder Lullaby. To Ava Lane. It was short. Too short. Just an address, not the greenhouse from the launch, but a sleek corner office in Soho. The kind of place with white walls, quiet hallways, and coffee that comes from countries you have to look up on a map. I spent an hour deciding what to wear, which was ridiculous since I only owned 2 categories of clothing, things I'd sewn and things too cheap to ruin if I spilled soup. I ended up in the same blazer dress from the launch, pressed and mended where the hem had started to fray. If she remembered me from the party, she'd remember me in this. When I arrived, the receptionist was one of those people who looked like they'd been born in a cashmere sweater. She offered me sparkling water, and when I said, "just tap," she handed me a glass anyway, which I think was her way of telling me my standards were cute but irrelevant here. Catherine's office wasn't large, but it was deliberate. A single rail of garments against the back wall, 3 sketchbooks stacked like they belonged to an architect, and 1 chair across from her desk that was just uncomfortable enough to keep visitors from settling in. She looked up when I entered, pen still moving across a page. "Ava," she said, like she was checking the sound of it against the air. "Sit." I sat. My knees touched. "I saw the photographer's post," she said, without preamble. "And I saw your dress. You made it?" "Yes," I said. "From 2 thrift pieces." Her eyes flicked up to mine. "You know it's imperfect." "Yes. But you also know it has a point of view." I hesitated, because saying yes felt like arrogance and saying no felt like lying. "I think so," I said carefully. "Good," she said. "The industry is drowning in people with skill and no voice. Or voice and no skill. Finding both in one person? Rare. But here's the problem. Most people with both are cowards. They won't risk being disliked." She let that hang there, watching me like she wanted to see if I'd flinch. I didn't. "I don't mind being disliked," I said. "I mind being dismissed." Catherine smiled, and it wasn't warm. It was satisfied, like she'd just solved for X. "I want you to work with us. Not for the agency. For Lullaby," she said. "We need someone with your resourcefulness. We're launching a capsule next quarter. It's small, but I want the face of it to feel real, and real is expensive to fake." The words landed, but the meaning took a moment. "Face?" I said. "As in model," she clarified, like she was talking to someone slow. "Not a standard campaign model. A story. Your story. We'd build the visuals around you, your process, your style. If you say yes, the brand will own the narrative, but you'll get paid. Decently. And exposure, if you know what to do with it." My pulse was everywhere, in my fingers, in my teeth. I thought about the way Sloane had laughed. About the whisper of "who invited Etsy?" About how all of that could dissolve under a single shift in narrative, from intern to face of the brand. "What's the catch?" I asked. "You can't be precious," she said. "We'll put you in things that aren't yours. You'll need to talk about your inspirations, even when the answer is rent money. And there will be people, friends, enemies, who'll decide you don't deserve it. Can you handle that?" I thought of Jonah, telling me I was the main event. I thought of my mother, who had no idea I sometimes skipped dinner to make rent. "Yes," I said. She nodded once, like a dealer cutting cards. "We shoot in 2 weeks. My assistant will send the details." The meeting ended as abruptly as it began. No handshake, no warmth. Just the sense that I'd been measured and found useful for now. The next 2 weeks were a blur of fittings, mood boards, and fittings again. I'd never been in a real styling session before, and it turned out to be part play, part surgery. They pinned clothes on me until I was a shape that matched their vision. They brushed my hair into something glossy but approachable. They kept telling me to own it, like confidence was something you could buy wholesale. Sloane was there one afternoon. She walked in, took one look at me on the fitting pedestal, and smiled with her mouth but not her eyes. "Guess anyone can get a campaign these days," she said to the stylist. I smiled back. "Guess so." The stylist laughed awkwardly and Sloane drifted off, probably to find better lighting. But the moment stuck with me not as an insult, but as proof. She noticed. The day of the shoot, the studio smelled like hot lights and new fabric. The photographer, the same one from the launch, greeted me like we were old friends. "Still got the dress?" he asked. "In my closet," I said. "Good. We'll shoot you in that too at the end." The main looks were Lullaby's capsule, soft wool trousers, silk blouses, coats that draped like water. I'd never worn anything that felt like it forgave me just for existing. Between shots, Catherine hovered like a conductor, adjusting a cuff here, a tilt of chin there. She wasn't affectionate, but she was invested, which, in this world, was rarer and better. When we finished the official shots, the photographer waved for my dress. I changed, the seams familiar against my skin, and stepped back under the lights. The set had gone quiet. Catherine stood with her arms crossed, watching as the photographer circled me. "Same stance as the light test," he said. The flash went off, and for a second, I saw it, the shift. From the girl who was laughed at to the girl who got the last frame of the day. A week later, the campaign dropped online. My face was everywhere. Lullaby lived their site, their socials, their newsletters. But it was the last image, the one in my blazer dress, that people shared the most. The caption read, "Resourcefulness is luxury too." The comments were different this time. Still a mix, but heavier with admiration. "This is the kind of story we need," one said. Another, "That hem is genius." And then, buried deep, I saw it, a comment from Sloane's account. Just 3 words. "Brave. Very art school." I stared at it until it stopped stinging and started sounding like something else entirely, a concession. That should have been the end. A neat arc. The girl who was mocked becomes the face of the brand. But stories don't end at the high point. That's where the real work starts. Because once you've been given a platform, you have to decide, will you stand on it quietly? Or will you use it to change who gets invited up next? I hadn't answered that question yet. But I knew one thing for certain, I would never again walk into a room and pray to be invisible. Not after this. You'd think being the face of a campaign would feel like standing in the sun. And in some ways, it did. Warm, validating, impossible to hide from. But sunlight also shows every crack in the surface. The first few weeks after the launch were a blur of interviews, reposts, and cautious congratulations from people who had never looked at me twice before. Old classmates slid into my DMs with "so proud of you," like they hadn't once called my thrift store jackets grandma chic. Even my mother, who never quite understood why anyone would pay for clothes when there were perfectly good ones at the clearance rack, started introducing me on the phone to her friends as my daughter, the model. But with the attention came the other kind. Anonymous accounts that picked apart my face, my body, my sad eyes, as if sadness were a flaw instead of a resource I'd learned to mine. And then there were the whispers that reached me through the grapevine. She only got it because she was in the right place at the right time. Catherine must be using her for the authenticity angle. Cute for a one-off, but she's not a real model. I could live with those. What I couldn't quite shake was Sloane. She wasn't in the capsule campaign, but she was everywhere else, invited to events, photographed in full Lullaby looks, tagged by the brand's PR partners. When we crossed paths at an industry mixer, she gave me the kind of hug that says, "I want people to think we like each other." "You're really making the most of your moment," she said, smiling like she owned the air between us. "It's been good," I said. "Just be careful," she replied, tilting her head. This industry loves to lift someone up for the novelty and drop them when the next novelty comes along. It was the kind of advice that sounds like concern but tastes like a warning. I smiled anyway. Guess I'll just have to become the next novelty too. Her smile froze for half a second before she recovered. And in that half second, I realized something important. Sloane wasn't just a fixture in this world. She was invested in keeping the hierarchy exactly as it was. People like me were meant to orbit her, not stand next to her. The next time Catherine invited me to the Lullaby offices, I was ready for something bigger than a photo shoot. The space smelled faintly of cedar and expensive toner. She motioned for me to sit, flipping through a lookbook draft before sliding it across the desk toward me. "I'm adding a behind-the-scenes component to the next release," she said. "Design diaries, studio visits, that kind of thing. I want you in it, not just as the face, but as a collaborator." A collaborator. The word landed like a key turning in a lock. "Why me?" I asked. "Because you understand what we're selling," she said. "Not just fabric, a story. And you're stubborn enough to protect it." That stubbornness wasn't born from confidence. It was survival. I'd spent years making beauty from scraps because scraps were all I had. If Lullaby wanted that story, fine, but I wasn't going to hand it over without leaving my fingerprints on every page. The Design Diary series meant hours in the workroom, not just being draped in garments, but sketching, pinning, arguing about proportions. I was careful, vocal enough to be seen as adding value, but not so vocal I looked like a threat to the actual design team. It also meant I was in the building more often, which meant more run-ins with Sloane, who had started popping by for fittings she didn't actually need. One afternoon, she lingered near my workstation, running her hand over a bolt of fabric. "You're getting quite the tour, aren't you?" she said. "Careful, too much access, and you'll start thinking you belong here." I looked up from the sketch I was adjusting. "Maybe I do." She laughed, that same light, airy sound from the launch night. "Oh, Ava. It's not about talent here. It's about legacy. Connections. Knowing who to call when things go sideways." I met her gaze. "Maybe my legacy starts here then." For a moment, she didn't answer. Then she smiled, but her eyes were flat. "We'll see." The tension between us simmered quietly, but I didn't let it distract me from my work. If anything, it sharpened me. I'd learned something crucial from being laughed at, that humiliation can either shrink you or harden you. I chose hardening. Jonah noticed the change. "You're different lately," he said one night over takeout. "How so?" "Not bad different. Just, you've got this edge now. Like you're always playing 3 moves ahead." I thought about that. He wasn't wrong. I was playing ahead because for the first time in my life, I had pieces on the board. The behind-the-scenes content went live in early spring. It wasn't just a campaign, it was a storybook. There I was, in grainy video, hunched over a sewing machine. There I was, pinning a sample on a dress form, my fingers quick and sure. And there was the blazer dress again, this time framed as the symbol of where it all started. People loved it. Sales spiked. Catherine's gamble had paid off. And in the middle of the praise, I noticed something that made me pause: a lack of posts from Sloane about the campaign. She wasn't tagged, she didn't share the brand's content, and when she did appear at events, she wore other designers. It didn't take much to put the pieces together. My presence was eating into her spotlight. I didn't set out to get revenge on Sloane. At least, not consciously. But when Catherine mentioned the upcoming fall show and how they'd be casting both campaign faces and runway models, I made a choice. "I know someone who'd be perfect for the closer," I said, "but only if I get to walk the opener." Catherine raised an eyebrow. "Confident." "Prepared," I corrected. 2 weeks later, the lineup went out. I was the opener. Sloane was not on the list at all. When the show day came, I stepped onto the runway in a coat so soft it felt like walking inside a cloud. The lights were blinding, the cameras endless. And somewhere in the crowd, I imagined Sloane watching, remembering the night she'd laughed at my hem. Only now, the hem was exactly where I wanted it, front and center. Walking the opener was supposed to be a professional milestone, but it felt more like a declaration of territory. The cameras caught everything: the set of my jaw, the easy swing of my coat, the way my eyes scanned the room like I knew exactly where I was meant to be. When I stepped off the runway, Catherine met me backstage with the kind of nod you give someone who's passed an unspoken test. "That coat sold out online before you even finished the walk," she said. It wasn't praise exactly, more like a data point. But it was enough. The after-show dinner was a small, invitation-only thing at a private loft. Warm lighting, low music, waiters who appeared out of nowhere with champagne. I was seated across from one of Lullaby's biggest investors, a silver-haired man who looked like he'd never in his life had to search for parking. "You're the girl from the campaign," he said, in that way people have of speaking about you as though you're not right there. "Yes," I said, holding his gaze. "Smart move on Catherine's part," he went on. "Fresh blood. Makes the brand look adaptable." I smiled politely, but inside, I clocked the word adaptable for what it really meant here, marketable without shaking the foundation too much. I didn't mind. "You can work with that. You just have to know when to stop playing along." Over the next month, my presence at Lullaby shifted from novelty to necessity. Catherine started inviting me to internal strategy meetings, not just fittings and shoots. I learned which fabric mills were non-negotiable, how much a single casting decision could sway the press coverage, and which influencers were worth sending a free coat to. I also learned how the unspoken hierarchy worked. The faces like Sloane, even me now, were valuable, but temporary. The real power was in the people who decided who got those spots in the first place. And that's where I started to imagine something bigger. It happened in the design room one afternoon. We were prepping looks for a pre-fall shoot when Catherine excused herself to take a call. One of the junior designers, a wiry guy named Theo, leaned toward me. "You know you're changing things, right?" he said. "Changing what? Who gets seen?" "Before you, it was all the same type, tall, symmetrical, money in the bloodline. You show up in a thrifted dress, and now they're actually looking at what people make, not just who they know." I hadn't thought about it that way. But once he said it, I couldn't unhear it. That night, over takeout, I told Jonah. "So, what? You're going to be the industry's savior," he teased. I shook my head. "No. I'm going to open a door. And when I do, I'm not going to hold it politely for one person at a time. I'm going to wedge it open so wide they can't close it." He smiled. "That sounds like you." But it also sounded dangerous. Because people like Sloane didn't just give up space. They fought for it. The first sign of pushback came in whispers. A stylist friend told me Sloane had been making helpful comments about me at fittings she attended, things like "Ava's sweet, but she's not exactly versatile, is she?" Or that whole scrappy backstory thing can only go so far. It didn't bother me at first. But when I learned she'd tried to angle herself into a campaign I was already booked for, suggesting to the client that maybe I was overexposed, I decided it was time to stop pretending this was just professional friction. This was a game. And I was done playing defense. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. One of Lullaby's partner brands, a high-end accessories label, was planning a crossover campaign for the holidays. Catherine was in talks to have me front it. I knew, because I heard it from Theo before it reached my inbox, that Sloane had already pitched herself for the job, claiming she was better suited to luxury markets. I could have waited for Catherine's decision. Instead, I asked for a meeting. "I can sell this better than anyone," I told her. "Not because I look the part, but because I am the part. People believe me when I talk about making something last. They'll believe me when I talk about buying one bag you'll use for 10 years. Catherine considered me for a long moment. "You're sure you want to keep taking the spotlight from Sloane?" "I'm not taking it," I said. "I'm building my own." 2 weeks later, the announcement went out. I was the face of the holiday campaign. The images were bold, me in tailored winter coats, holding bags like they were heirlooms, my thrifted blazer dress making another cameo in the brand's behind-the-scenes reel. Sloane didn't comment publicly. But I noticed she stopped showing up at Lullaby events. My influence kept growing, and so did the invitations, not just to model, but to speak. Panels about sustainability, podcasts about creative careers. Each time, I slipped in a mention of where I came from, how fashion had once been a locked door to me, and how it didn't have to stay that way for others. Catherine didn't stop me. In fact, she seemed to be watching closely, like she was calculating what it meant to have someone on her team who could draw both press and loyalty. That's when I realized If I kept this up, I could move from being the face to being part of the decision-making itself. But here's the thing about climbing: the higher you go, the more visible your enemies become. Because while I was learning the boardroom side of fashion, Sloane was recalibrating her own strategy. And the next time she came for me, it wasn't going to be with a laugh at a party. It was going to be with something sharper. The warning came from Theo. He caught me outside the Lullaby workroom one morning, his expression sharper than usual. "She's making a move," he said. "Sloane." He nodded. "She's talking to people in PR, saying you've been difficult, demanding, that you've been making side deals with other brands without clearing it with Catherine." The accusation was absurd. I'd been meticulous about checking every outside job with Lullaby's team. But in this industry, the truth mattered less than the version people repeated often enough. "She's trying to plant seeds," Theo continued. "If she gets enough people doubting you, she doesn't have to push you out. You'll just stop getting called." I'd seen it happen before, not to me, but to others. One month, their faces were everywhere. The next, it was as if they'd never existed. I didn't intend to let that happen quietly. The next few days were a study in restraint. I didn't confront Sloane directly. Instead, I started pulling my receipts, literally. Every approval email, every campaign contract, every thread where Catherine or her assistant had signed off on my work. I built a digital folder labeled insurance and kept adding to it. Jonah noticed my late nights and the way my phone never left my side. "You're hunting something," he said. "I'm making sure if she swings at me, I've got armor," I told him. "And if armor's not enough, then I'll have a sword too." The breaking point came during a strategy meeting for the upcoming spring show. Catherine had gathered the team, including me and, to my surprise, Sloane. She hadn't been in a meeting like this in months. We were reviewing the show order when Catherine mentioned wanting to start with something unexpected. Sloane leaned forward. "I've actually been thinking about that," she said. "What if we open with someone the audience knows, but in a way that redefines them? Like me, for example. People associate me with evening wear, but imagine the impact if I open the show in something clean, minimal, almost architectural. It would set the tone." She glanced at me, just long enough for the message to land. "Your opener spot? I'm taking it." Before Catherine could respond, Sloane added, "And it would let us course-correct the brand image a bit. Things have gotten a little too casual lately." Casual. The polite way to say thrift store girl. I didn't wait for Catherine to answer. "Or," I said, "we could open with a story that's been selling out every drop we've released for the past 6 months. You know, the one people line up for online. The one that made headlines in every trade publication we care about." Silence spread across the table. Catherine's eyes flicked between us, and I saw it, the spark of curiosity. "Why don't we test both concepts?" she said finally. "We'll do a press preview with 2 openers. The response will decide." It was a gamble. If the press preferred Sloane's look, she'd have the opener and the narrative. But if I won, it would be decisive. I went home that night and called Jonah. "I'm not just going to win this," I said. "I'm going to make sure she never tries this again." "How?" he asked. "By making it so the only story people want is mine." The preview was held in a smaller venue, invite only for editors and photographers. Sloane went first. She looked flawless, draped in an ivory column dress, hair slicked back, the kind of minimalist chic that screamed high fashion. The applause was polite, the camera shutter steady. Then it was my turn. I walked out in a structured coat I'd co-designed, layered over a reworked silk slip, and, at my insistence, my original blazer dress peeking through as the base layer. The hem was still raw, a direct callback to where it had all started. The reaction was instant. The room lit up, not just with camera flashes, but with a murmur that rose like a wave. I could hear editors whispering, "That's the girl, the story." By the end of the night, the press write-ups were unanimous. Lullaby doubles down on the narrative that changed its season. My name was in every headline. 2 days later, the official show order came out. I was the opener. Sloane wasn't just second, she was closing the first half, the slot brands used when they wanted to keep a name around, but didn't trust them to set the tone. Theo passed me in the hall and said, "That wasn't just a win. That was a message." And it was. Not just to Sloane, but to anyone else watching. I wasn't here because of luck or a light test or a novelty factor. I was here because I'd made myself impossible to replace. I thought that might be the end of it. But Sloane wasn't the type to take a loss and retreat. I could feel it, the weight of her next move building in the background. And when it came, it wouldn't just be about the runway. It would be personal. It started quietly, the way most dangerous things do. A DM from a stylist I trusted. Heads up, Sloane's been talking to a journalist. Stories about the dark side of brand narratives. Guess who the example is? I didn't even need to guess. 2 days later, the piece dropped online. A glossy headline on a major fashion site. When the face becomes the brand, and the brand becomes the face. The photo was of me in the blazer dress, mid-laugh at a shoot. The tone was slick, measured, but the message underneath was sharp, questioning whether my scrappy rise was genuine or manufactured PR. It quoted an anonymous industry source, saying I'd exaggerated my background for sympathy, that I'd been strategically positioned to sell a fairy tale. I didn't have to read the comments to know what they were saying. And I didn't have to ask who the anonymous source was. Sloane had done what she couldn't on the runway. She'd gone after my credibility. The first call I got was from Jonah. "Tell me you're not going to let her get away with this," he said. Not only am I not going to let her get away with it, I told him, I'm going to make sure she regrets ever trying. I called Catherine before lunch. "I know you've seen the article," I said. "I have," she replied, calm as ever. "I can prove it's deliberate sabotage," I said. "I have a folder, every approval, every contract, every piece of evidence that shows this brand brought me here because I earned it. I want to use it. Publicly." Catherine was silent for a long moment. "You understand," she said, "if you go public with this, you won't just be ending her. You'll be setting a precedent for how this brand deals with betrayal." "Then let's make it the right precedent," I said. We didn't go to the tabloids. We went bigger. 2 weeks later, Lullaby hosted a live-streamed panel on authenticity in modern fashion. It was billed as a conversation about storytelling, brand values, and sustainability. Catherine moderated. I was the headliner. Halfway through, she asked, "Ava, there have been questions recently about your journey, about whether the story people know is the full truth. What do you say to that?" I looked straight into the camera. I say the truth is simple. I came here with nothing but a sewing kit and a belief that I could make something from what others threw away. And every step since has been earned, documented, approved, and paid for in work, not in favors. If anyone has questions, I invite them to look at the record. It's all there. Then I smiled, just enough to be polite. And if anyone still wants to doubt it, that's fine. I didn't come here to convince everyone. I came here to open the door for people who never thought they'd be allowed in. And I'm not leaving. The next morning, Catherine released a statement from the brand's official account, attaching select receipts from my insurance folder. The message was clear: Lullaby stood by me. The fallout was immediate. Industry blogs speculated about the anonymous source, and, though her name was never printed, the whispers pointed one way. Brands don't like risks, and overnight, Sloane became one. Invitations dried up. Campaign offers vanished. She was still beautiful, still talented, but she'd broken the unspoken rule. You don't try to burn down the house you still live in. As for me, the storm passed faster than I expected. The panel had gone viral in a good way, clipped, reposted, praised for grace under fire. The blazer dress sold out in a limited reproduction Catherine had approved without even telling me, and a percentage of the profits went to a grant for young designers without formal training. That part was my idea. My wedge in the door. The last time I saw Sloane was at a gallery opening months later. She was in a back corner, sipping wine, talking to someone who wasn't really listening. Our eyes met across the room. She didn't smile. Neither did I. I just turned back to my conversation because there was nothing left to win. I'd already taken everything that mattered. When I got home that night, I hung the blazer dress back on its nail. The hem was still raw, still imperfect. So was I. But both of us had survived every hand that had tried to cut us down. And both of us were exactly where we were meant to be in the light, unshakable, and no longer asking for permission.